Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the sheep pen, bah, where no goats are allowed. So today I want to introduce a new series called In Search of the Father. Now, many of you might be feeling a little bit orphaned today. In my series on Jesus, I made it perfectly clear that Jesus called the God of the Pharisees the devil. He called the Pharisees the children of the devil. And I said in a roundabout way that there were portions of the Bible where God is represented when it isn't God at all, but the God of the Pharisees. And there are times in the Old Testament where you are seeing God the Father. And I'm going to, in this series, reveal to you how there's been a series of misidentifications, that there is a one true God, God the Father, that Jesus speaks of, the one that we were instructed to pray to. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And you know the rest. But at the same time, Jesus declares the God of the Pharisees to be the devil. And for me, this confusion where the God of the Old Testament seems to be very much out of character with God the Father that Jesus speaks of. Jesus speaks of a merciful God, a forgiving God, a loving God, a caring God, an accepting God, a God that just wants to love you, a God that doesn't require you to jump through a lot of hoops, but rather a God of faith and simple belief. Jesus taught that before you can see the kingdom of God, before you can accept the Father, you have to become like a little child. You have to come at this thing from a position where you have purged from your mind all of the preconceived ideas, because if you do not, you'll easily fall into any number of false teachings. You'll fall into the God of the Pharisees trap. You could fall into Luciferianism. You could fall into paganism. But for you to fully understand the God that Jesus speaks of, you have to empty yourself of everything you know and come at this from a fresh perspective. Now, the God of the Pharisees took over the church in the very early days. You can see the God of the Pharisees trying to take over Jesus' own disciples while he was still alive. He finds his disciples arguing over who's going to take charge once Jesus is gone. Who is the greatest amongst you? And Jesus rebukes them and tells them that you that think you're the greatest are the smallest, and you that think you're nothing are actually the greatest. And the concept of a hierarchy of clergy is the earmark of the Pharisaical God. You got a high priest, you got a council of priests, you got a Sanhedrin council, and all of them look down their noses at the people. They're gatekeepers to their truth. They say who can and cannot come to the Father. They say what you have to do in this earthly realm, how you have to behave, what you have to think, and they're very controlling. And this was trying to penetrate Jesus' own disciples, and eventually it would permeate the church, and the church would stop being the church of Jesus Christ and become once again the church of the Pharisee. And we saw this all throughout the early stages of the church. You know, they appoint themselves a pope. He's the vicar of Christ, or the representation of Christ on earth. He can give out papal commands and dictates. They control the people. Eventually, the Pope would get an army to back up his religious ideas and to enforce them on the people. And you start to see the God of the Pharisee has a personality. He's wrathful. He's controlling. He appoints people on earth to act as his control mechanisms. He uses laws and religious rituals and demands heavy burdens that he places onto people. And It's very judgmental, very much condemning of people. And that is the earmark of the God of the Pharisees. Now, the God, the Father that Jesus talks about is more egalitarian in nature. Everyone is equal. Paul said, there's no more Jew, no more Gentile, not even male and female. He places all of us on an equal footing. That's one of the things about children, is that children are all equal to each other. You don't see the head kid who's the boss over all the little kids. It's everybody is just a kid. Okay? And so the earmark of God the Father is a equal playing field amongst everyone. No one's greater than anyone else. This is something that's been difficult for me to accept. This is my pathway, also is my pathway away from the God of the Pharisees. At one time, I was very much steeped in the God of the Pharisees, whether I realized it or not. I believed in bishops. I believed in pastors and district pastors and structure and cathedrals and temples and holy objects and items. And all of this leads back to this God of the Pharisees, which bears no resemblance to God the Father. God the Father sees us all as containing the breath of life. All of us are living souls. All of us are capable of greatness. All of us are susceptible to failure. All of us are capable of being deceived. And yet, any of us are capable of great deeds, great things. You know, I always says, one of the humbling things that I've said over time to help rid myself of this kind of thinking, is that, in the Old Testament, God spoke through a donkey. And I said, if he spoke through a donkey, he could definitely use a jackass like me. And so there's a certain earmark to people who are followers of the true God and the true Christ. They tend to have a sense of humility. They don't believe in hierarchy and power and authority in this earth. They don't try to force their opinions down your throat. And I could give you examples of these men who are the true followers of God the Father. The obvious archetype, the obvious perfect example is Jesus Christ. He didn't chase after wealth. In fact, he said you can't love God and love money. You'll love one master and hate the other. So if you love God, you'll hate money. If you love money, you'll hate God. The Bible tells us the love of money is the root of all evil. So you could say materialism, pursuit of wealth, pursuit of power, all of these are earmarks of the Pharisee God and his followers. The true followers of Jesus, the true followers of God the Father, have a humility. They will say things like what Paul said. I've been hard on Paul, but as I open up this new series on the In Search of God the Father, you'll see how Paul's teachings were actually they were perverted by the early Pharisee takeover of the early Christian movement, and that Paul has been misrepresented, misquoted, and some of the scriptures in the New Testament attributed to him, I will offer you proof, were not authored by him. So when you start to pick through who was Paul, you get back to the same kind of character that from here on out I will call the character of the sage. The character of the sage is like John the Baptist, a voice crying in the wilderness, like Jesus, who said the Son of Man has no place to lay his head and has a rock for a pillow. Paul lived off of the generosity of others and couch surfed, essentially. You'll see this in all true characters who have come since then. There's a long list of these sage type, very earthy, very much tied to the natural creation of the earth, not the not the physical manifestation of civilization and power and wealth and order and even law. We can get into the law and how the law is meant to control people and keep them locked into the Pharisaical teaching. That the law was designed by Pharisees to control people and to keep them in constant fear. And how, when you look at the sage character of Jesus Christ, he talks about a spiritual divine law that comes from a relationship of a spiritual nature, not an adherence to a clerical dictate. When you look at John the Baptist, he operated outside the system. When you look at Elijah, another sage that that operated outside the system, many times, if not every time, you have these these people, okay, these sages, these holy men. You could call them friars if you wanted to. There was a resurgence of this in the Middle Ages, where monks who wandered the countryside, who didn't have big monasteries, they didn't have big churches and cathedrals. They taught against it. They lived off of the offerings of the people, the sharing of the people. There's a communalness that is opposed to capitalism, that's a part of the true religion of Christianity and the religion of God the Father that goes back through time. That anytime you get them building big cathedrals, building big temples, coming up with all these rituals, coming up with all these rules and laws to control people, you start to see that they shift from the true faith that is based in the spirit realm into the physical realm. All of these things are physical controls. The law is meant to physically control people, where being free from the law releases people to be spiritual and not to be bound by earthly things. And so you have this denunciation of wealth. You have this moving away from being a property holder. You have this denunciation of power and authority in favor of the simple sage who sits under a tree and speaks to those who come along, or who wander through the world and talk to people at random, like Jesus spoke to the woman at the well and changed her life in a moment. That Pharisees build buildings, Pharisees build structures, Pharisees build ritual and tradition, and they have all of this complex doctrine. And well, Jesus said they are focused, not Jesus or Paul said they are focused on the scripture while missing the whole point. They go back and they mine ancient doctrines and ideas and scriptures that they've collected to put forth their own ideas, but there's an earmark, there's a nature, there's a genuine character of people who serve the Pharisaical God. And there's a very much a character and a nature that I equate with the sage. Now, what are sages? Sages are men like John the Baptist. Sages are men like Elijah. Sages are men like the early Franciscan and Benedictine monks. Sages are people who are so focused on the spirit realm that they refuse to engage in the earthly world. They refuse to engage in politics. They don't seek power. They don't seek authority. They don't force their opinions on other people. They share their knowledge freely and openly with people. And in exchange, the people give them the basics of life, help them out along the way. This is the transformation that I underwent when I went from being Reverend Phil to being Sage Wanderer. That I had to work through denouncing earthly power and authority. That I took a lot of joy early in my ministry, that I was pedigreed. I'm the son of a bishop. I was ordained as a bishop at the age of 30. I was ordained in every major strain of modern religious Christianity. And I took a lot of pride in my authority. And I had to go through some humbling. I had to live in a van down by the river. I had to live in a garage for a winter. I had to spend a year and a half in a shed with no plumbing and no electricity for the first several months. And I never did have plumbing. I had an outhouse. And even now, where God did finally allow me to have some of the basics in life, my home is so humble as it's still a shack or a shed. And I never tell you how you have to believe. I never demand that you believe the way that I believe. I don't prescribe any penalties. In fact, I repeat often what Paul said, another great sage, who said that you have to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. That the true pathway to God the Father comes through the understanding that religion as we know it is false. All religion, every religion, if it contains those elements, earthly power, wealth, uh, doctrinal dominance, judgmentalism, crime and punishment. Here's the rules. If you break the rules, here's your punishment. The Roman Catholic Church is a prime example of the modern day Pharisee. And at the time of the Reformation, we see people like Martin Luther, who was a humble priest who had many issues of his own, was not by any means perfect. And he calls out the spirit of the Pharisee alive in the world at his time and triggers a thing we know as the Reformation or the Protestant movement. Now, there's lots of problems with many of the Protestant offspring of the Protestant movement, the churches that have come up since then, because whereas they denounce some elements of the Pharisaical system, they cling on to others like judgmentalism and the Codex of Law, and they don't really put an emphasis on truly spiritual things, but they try to obtain spiritual things through physical means. Let me make something perfectly clear to you. You will never obtain spiritual knowledge and spiritual growth. You will never become your spiritual best version of yourself as long as you hold on to the materialism, as long as you hold on to judgment, as long as you hold on to ritual, as long as you hold on to dominance and clerical power. And so we kind of traded one form of Pharisee for another. And it's because the God of this earth, the one that was the God of the Pharisees that Jesus called sons of the devil, called what he called the Pharisees. So you could just say the devil is always at work to infiltrate any attempt at religious organization. That you might even say he's the author of religious organization. That disorganized religion is actually the truth. Jesus didn't organize. He didn't place one guy ahead of another. Jesus never talked about building a physical church. Jesus taught that the church is the body of believers. That, and once again, Paul taught that you got to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. This is the opposite of orthodoxy. The orthodoxy and the spirit of the Pharisee are the same thing. When you set down a codex of beliefs and you demand all that your followers follow it to a T, when you excommunicate, when you put people in prison for their spiritual thought, for them working out their own salvation, when you demand that everybody thinks the same way, when you start operating in thought control, life control, when you use money and power and authority to not convince people, but overpower and dominate people. That the sage, the voice crying in the wilderness, the seeker, one might say, he finds his own truths, and they're all spiritual in nature. A sage, a true follower of Christ. And when I use the word sage, I'm referring to something that I like to call the golden thread. That there is throughout history this original religion of where God is recognized as a spirit, and that any exchanges with God are from a spiritual and non-physical world. And not to say all sages have everything figured out. There were things that John the Baptist didn't know. There were things that Elijah didn't have right. There were things that the Benedictines and the Franciscans and the early monks of the modern Christian realm didn't have right. The Puritans uh, came at this from a sage perspective to some degree, but they dragged along with them elements of this. And so not everyone has it right. And there's this thing that some people call the golden thread. And it's the idea that even though the devil is at work to infiltrate every religious idea and turn it into a structured source of power and authority, at the same time, in every religion is the true God the Father who is trying to reach any seekers. Jesus said, "Seek and ye shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened unto you. Ask and it shall be given to you." And so at all times throughout history, in every religion, in every culture, in every place where humans draw breath, there is God the Father always. And we'll get into the nature of the Trinity in future episodes of this, because I have a idea I want to share with you, a belief about the Trinity. But right now we're talking about God the Father. God the Father is at all times working to infiltrate every religion and offer them the true faith. And what is the true faith? What is the nature of God the Father? And I think Jesus said it best when he said, "If you've seen me, you've seen the Father." So when you see Jesus living this life of humility, when you see Jesus, as we saw in our last series, relinquishing the mantle of earthly leadership, he refused to take charge of the Jewish religion. He refused to engage in a rebellion against the Romans and the Jews. He taught his disciples to operate on a one-on-one basis, just like Jesus ministered to the woman at the well, just like Jesus got his disciples not through a great sermon or from the multitude, but on a one-on-one basis. He collected these people that he made students of them. He made disciples of them, and he taught them in the true faith, the true religion. The way is what I like to call it. Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." So you can't get to God through religion. You can't get to God through some bishop. You can't get to God through money. You can't buy your way into heaven. You can't do it through piety and holiness. You have to do it through faith and through the pathway of personal searching, working out your own salvation with fear and trembling. So I'm going to open up this new series. This is the first in a long series. And I ask all of you to become like little children and to try to exorcise the demons of the Pharisee that have inflicted your mind. The concept that there's only one way to rightness, that your church knows everything, or your pastor knows everything, or even let go of the Bible being the only, that everything has to be filtered through the Bible and balanced through all parts of it. They call it the whole Bible. And I want you to look at the Bible more like as breadcrumbs, the golden thread. Jesus said that the pathway to destruction is wide and everyone goes that way. But the pathway to truth, the pathway to salvation is narrow and winding, and few find it. It's the golden thread. It's the God, the true God, who loves us all, the God of love, the Father in heaven, who is seeking to draw all of us towards him. At the same time, the devil, the God of the Pharisees, the God of power, earthly power, of money and materialism and judgmentalism, and this hierarchy of I'm better than you, and who are you to say to me? Pride. It's the God of pride. is also at work to infiltrate every religion and every person's thought process. It's why you have to empty your cup. It's why you have to become like a child. You have to empty your mind of all of that and look for the golden thread. Look for the character of God. Look for the nature of Christ. If you have a religion or a faith or an ideology, and it is that like the Pharisees, where the leaders seek authority and power and talk down to you. I'm being attacked by flies again. The devil don't want this message to get out. Y'all keep praying for me, because I'm telling you what, the devil doesn't want this message out. He wants you locked in religion. He wants you going and paying your dues at the Pharisaical church, and he never wants you to discover the truth. The life, the truth, the way, and the life. The way, the truth, and the life. He doesn't want you to find your true pathway to God. He wants you to be orphaned, and the devil is at work in all things. And the spirit of the Pharisee is there all the time to pollute men's minds. It's an easy temptation. It's the same temptation that the devil brought against Jesus when he was in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, when he said, just bow down and worship me, and I'll give you everything. I'll give you all of the riches of the world. This is the temptation that we all face. True faith is giving. True faith is love. True faith is like Matthew 25, feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, praying for the sick, visiting people in prison. And when you do this for each other, you do it for God. The God of love is not the God of the Pharisees. It's not the God of the Roman Church. Jesus is God. The Father is not the God of most, if not all, of your evangelical, charismatic, Pentecostal Protestants of every way, shape, and form. If their desire is power, if their desire is wealth, if their desire is control, if their desire is to be the preeminent voice, then they're the Pharisee. We'll get into this more in future episodes. I hope you enjoy what I'm talking about. I hope you see the wisdom in what I'm saying. And one characteristic of the sage, he never jams his opinions down anyone's throat. So I don't argue. I'm not trying to convince you. I'm simply telling you what I've discovered through 50 years of very difficult pursuit. I've been in hot pursuit of Jesus, in hot pursuit of God the Father, in hot pursuit of the way, the truth, and the life. And I believe that I've found it for myself. And I want to share with you what I've learned so that you can find it for yourself as well. And it may not look exactly like my version. But one thing, rest assured, you won't get here is the Pharisee way of teaching. You won't get me ramming it down your throat. You won't get me demanding that you believe like I believe. You don't have to. Feel free to disagree. You have to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. But you're going to do that not by following blindly some religious edict, some religious ideology, but through a true pursuit of truth. You have to pursue God. You have to pursue life. You have to pursue truth. It doesn't just come and ram itself down your throat. That's what the devil does. He's always there going, this is what you should believe. This is what you should believe. I'm saying you should empty your mind. Look at Jesus and what he said and try to find your way to the truth and the life. All right, we'll see you next time. Oh, by the way, support the channel. I need your donations so that I can eat and have lights on so I can continue doing this ministry. All right, we'll see you next time on the Sheep Pen.